In a nutshell.
In a nutshell.
In a nutshell, we're just a rock and roll band out on the road.
In 1991, Guns N' Roses, already established as the biggest band on the planet, released 2 albums that would change the face of rock music, the record industry, and everything that surrounded them. Accompanied by a monumental world tour, the unveiling of Use Your Illusion 1 and 2 was an exercise in over-the-top superstardom to which no other band has since come close.
I don't think any band has ever released on the same day 2 double albums of original studio material. And I'm sure this was Guns N' Roses using the clout that Appetite had given them. Enormous sales, huge profits for the record label to say, what we want now is to do things our way.
There were lines of people out in front of Tower Records. We watched it on the news. You know, we were part of a record that was on the news.
Looking back on it, you know, it was pretty amazing. You know, with how this band went from guys who were living off of biscuits and gravy from Denny's, you know, to all of a sudden becoming superstars.
This film takes an in-depth look at those albums, the music and the men behind it. Even before their extravagant antics in 1991, Guns N' Roses had gained success with remarkable speed, exploding from the vibrant and fertile Los Angeles rock scene.
LA was kind of, I guess, the melting pot of rock and rollers everywhere, whether you were from Europe, you were from even as Asia, and of course Mid-America. We all came here hoping to get discovered. I think Hollywood has places like the Rainbow Bar and Grill, which is the only bar or restaurant you could go to where you could meet either your future ex-wife or your lead singer. You might meet your roadie. You might meet the record company that gives you a deal. And I think the Rainbow kind of offered that synergy, that place where you could go and make your dreams come true. And I don't think you had that in Philadelphia or New York or Chicago.
The first time I saw Guns N' Roses was in 1986. I saw them at the Music Machine. And, you know, at that time there was a buzz, you know, regarding them as one of the best LA bands out there, and they were definitely different than a lot of the bands that were around at the time. You know, you had a lot of the girl glam bands, you know, the real hair bands at the time that were playing the Strip. And you had Whitesnake, and you had Motley Crue doing, you know, the Girls, Girls, Girls tour. You had Poison.
Hair metal was an actual cliche that people used at the time. If you walked up and down Sunset Strip, you'd see all these bands ostensibly trying to play at these pay-for-play clubs. And MTV was pretty much as influential as it ever would be in the music scene. As a result, most of the bands that you saw queuing up to play in these clubs looked like, say, the Poisons of the world. They had the puffy hair. These were the bands that were trying to emulate what they saw on TV. They were basically filling the LA clubs.
Guns N' Roses kind of stood out because they were very raw, they were very in your face. Axl still had the poofed hair, but it was more of a raw, rougher sound than what was going on at that time.
Guns N' Roses just had the it factor, like Motley Crue did. There was a low in the glam scene, and a lot of people say that Guns N' Roses came on with this different look and this harder edge and all that stuff. Well, you know, I was there, and their music might be a little bit more heavy metal than the glam rock, the glitz of Rat or Motley Crue, but they looked the same to me. They were glam too. The difference, besides the music being harder, was they weren't quite as good looking as the bands previous to them, like Motley Crue and Rat. Those guys were actually prettier than the girls.
You never saw a music scene like the Sunset Strip glam rock scene, where it was the worldwide music scene. You know what I'm saying? There was not there wasn't other bands exploding from other places and they were kind of joining in with you. Maybe they came from other places, but you all had to come through kind of the filter that was the Sunset Strip. So even before bands got worldwide success or mainstream success, they still had to earn their stripes here, you know, in Hollywood.
Hints of the band's later excess were clearly evident back then. Musician Howard Tiemann, later to feature on Use Your Illusion 2, played with Guns N' Roses at infamous LA hangout, The Whiskey.
It was such a madhouse there that the show was on. We were up at the house before that, jamming at the house anyways. We were all getting very drunk. We were back then very drunk. And so they said, okay, well, you're on. So we all got in our cars. There was a big caravan of us. And we all drove down the Whiskey. And it was so packed we couldn't even get near the place. So they said, okay, forget it, it's canceled. So we went back home. Then we get the call, it's on again. So we had to rush back down there and get down there. And by the time we got on stage, it was just such a joke and a funny. I wasn't intimidated. We were just really good drunk, perfect timing, perfect high. So I wasn't nervous. It was great. I still remember it to this day, like sitting there, the feeling of playing like Welcome to the Jungle and just this is really wild. It was a really fun time, man. I got real lucky because Steve Adler broke his arm. I guess they were in Chicago rehearsing for the next album or whatever they were doing, and they were told they were able to go back home, and then they they made him stay an extra 2 weeks, and Steve got all pissed and punched a light post and broke his arm, broke his hand, and so I got lucky. I ended up sitting in for him for a show and playing. So I got to play out those songs I really liked very much, like Paradise City. He came to me, Duff told me that we're gonna play 4 songs, and I practiced those songs, it was like 2 or 3 days before the show. And then we get on stage, and of course, they open up with I Used to Love Her, But I Had to Kill Her, which I hadn't even heard yet because the second album wasn't even out yet. So we ended up starting the set of a song I never even heard. They were teaching me backstage. And we ended up doing 8 songs, all of my favorites and stuff. And on the way there, I knew in my head that they're gonna hit us up for an encore. They're not just gonna let us do 4 songs. So I was listening to It's So Easy in the car, trying to like really learn it. You listen to it and you know the song, but you have to know it to play it.
I'll see you since the river Sunday grass. She got the blues, I'll take that. She got the take, no need to try. Ready to play. It's so easy. Everybody's like, it's so baby. It's so easy. Everybody's like,
Sure enough, that was our encore. It's So Easy, which ended up working out real well.
Steadily gaining more notoriety, it was the band's breakthrough full-length debut album that would skyrocket them to worldwide fame. Appetite for Destruction arrived in July 1987.
My personal history with the band goes back to shortly after the release of Appetite for Destruction. So Rip Magazine was the first magazine that was on the streets gathering interviews and material on the band. My editors, my freelance writers, were all hanging out with them.
Anyway, hey, what's up? I want you guys to stay tuned for a great offer from Rip Magazine, the coolest metal magazine in the known universe.
Listen to Guns N' Roses. Call 1-800-962-8600. Get 12 issues of Rip and a free Rip t-shirt for only $18.95. Call 1-800-962-8600 now to get 12 issues of Rip and a free Rip t-shirt.
So is that a great deal or what? Just pick up the phone, get you 12 issues of Rip Magazine, and get your free Rip t-shirt. Let me use my, I'm reading the magazine. Let me use the phone here.
Call 1-800-962-8600. Get 12 issues of Rip and a free Rip t-shirt for only $18.95.
Yes, don't be stupid. Subscribe today.
We had some of the earliest pieces as Appetite started to pick up steam. Appetite blew up, as everybody knows, into a global phenomenon.
That album is an it album. That album will stand the test of time forever.
When I hear Appetite for Destruction, I think, I was living in LA, I heard this song on the radio, I saw these guys live many times, they sure were famous, weren't they? And then weirdly, and this is the thing that I think is really interesting with Guns N' Roses, I think of what they look like because I was forced to see what they look like from seeing their music videos all the time. I think of what their, I hate to say costumes, because that's not really quite true, but I think of their look. I think of them almost as like kind of cartoon caricatures in a sense. So, that said, if I'm at a party and someone puts on Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction, the more drinks I have, the better it sounds.
I think people have to bear in mind, when Appetite for Destruction came out, there was very little hype. They were just another band on Geffen from LA. I do remember at one point, their manager at the time, Alan Livin, saying, if we go gold, if we sell 500,000 copies of this album in America, we will be delighted. And I was with them in San Francisco when they were supporting The Cult, when the album first broke into the Billboard Top 100. Now we're talking about Top 100, not Top 10. And they were ecstatic. They couldn't believe they charted. So they weren't a band who had a lot of money poured into them. The expectations were not enormous at that point, but it slowly gathered momentum. Don't forget, Appetite wasn't an immediate hit album. It took a year, really, for it to take off. And then suddenly, it just locked into the zeitgeist, as it were, and just hit. It hit a nerve and suddenly became the right album in the right place at the right time and just exploded. And to this day, I don't believe for a minute anyone at the label genuinely thought it was going to be even close to as big as it became.
It didn't sound like anything else that was out at the time. And you just knew, you listen to that record and you go, wow. If you listen to it in a car, if it comes out, like Welcome to the Jungle, you hear that on the radio, it's just, you roll up the windows, man, and you turn it up, man.
When I heard Welcome to the Jungle the first time, it's the same way when I heard Nirvana with that first song, Teen Spirit. It's just like you go, fuck, I wish I would have written that one.
That was the record I remember first coming to Hollywood, that it didn't matter what strip club you were at, if it was in San Francisco, San Diego, LA, there wasn't a strip club in America that didn't have a girl dancing to Welcome to the Jungle. You heard it at every strip bar. It had that kind of impact. They were the epitome of a stripper kind of rock band. You had to have a singer like Axl. You had to have a drummer like Steven Adler. You had to have a wild Jack Daniels swigging guitar player like Slash. I'd be interested to see the stock in Jack Daniels sales after Appetite for Destruction came up. I'm sure Slash sold a lot of whiskey.
At the time, I didn't really realize what was going on, because I was part of it. But looking back on it, it was pretty amazing. With how this band went from guys who were living off of biscuits and gravy from Denny's, to all of a sudden becoming superstars.
One time I was at the Rainbow and I ran into Izzy and he's in a limo and everything, and it was just so weird because I almost felt like he almost like was talking apologetically. He goes, "Man, I don't know how this happened. I don't know how this happened." I'm going, "Well, if you figure it out, can you tell me so I can do it?"
Appetite will always be a classic album. There are a lot of other classic albums that don't sound so well produced now as they did then, but that one seems to pass that test still. They still traverse the line between mainstream and sort of classic integral rock, really. They're loved by housewives as much as real rockers that have liked them since day one. And it's still selling today, just like a lot of other classic albums, and it will probably always be selling at the same rate. I think it's 5,000 copies a week it tends to sell. So that's obviously proof that it still is what people still want to hear it now as if it's a new album.
This fast-rising superstardom was testament to the unique chemistry of the band's personalities, a collection of wild-spirited yet undeniably talented rock and rollers.
Obviously the focal point is Axl, and closely followed by Slash. Axl really was the breaking point for the band in terms of, if it wasn't for him, then they certainly wouldn't have ever made it. He had the volatility as well as the sort of sensitivity that really clashed well with Slash, who was very mellow and chilled out and kind of not interested in the drama. Then you mix them with Izzy and Steven, who were kind of lazy and didn't really care too much what they were doing. And then Duff obviously stood out because he was really tall, and he came from a punk background, which kind of gave them an extra boost. They weren't a soft band like a lot of the hair bands were.
I had met like that fellow Duff, I think before they even made their first record at backstage at, I think, an Alice Cooper show. And I thought he was a very nice, very tall guy. I liked him a lot. Generally speaking, I thought he brought some degree of stability to the band. Slash, I thought he was a really good guy. I know he had his problems. I thought that from a musical standpoint, I probably thought he brought the most to the band of anybody in the sense of actually really liking music and being aware, for better or worse, of the images and the importance of image and appreciation. I do think that the biggest issue, if you will, with Guns N' Roses was and has historically been Axl. And I do think that everybody else, it was sort of a subsidiary to Axl in almost every capacity.
Just like Def Leppard, obviously Joe Elliott. They're not from LA, but there's a perfect example of another band that made it in the glam era. Joe Elliott was obviously the boss. Axl was clearly the leader and clearly the one that had the vision. But every single one of those guys, Steven Adler, Izzy, Slash, and Duff, they all could contribute what seemed like nobody else could. And when you bring 5 guys like that together, and then you've got a leader and a front man that's as phenomenal as Axl, there's no way they couldn't have made it.
Since 1980, it's been pretty bland as far as rock and roll is concerned. And so at least, if nothing else, the attitude of the band has come over and people are like, yeah, because, I mean, that's sort of like what rock and roll is all about, right?
Well,
it's just sort of that freedom kind of thing.
It wasn't that there wasn't a
Not to
good
sound
band.
hippie-ish or anything.
Yeah. I mean, there's always Aerosmith and AC/DC were still around. They're great bands, but I think kids, in the late '80s here didn't really have a band who were their peers to cling on to or whatever,
Man, that's the kind of chemistry that you can't buy that. It just happens. And sometimes it lasts a long time and sometimes it lasts for an instant. But they had it. They complemented one another.
I think they are the act that they are because they were better. They were just better. More talented, more skill, more charisma. They just had it all.
Guns N' Roses were now undeniably massive. Their repackaged Lies EP went on to sell quantities far in excess of most bands' proper albums. What with such a level of ubiquity, many would have thought that a backlash would be inevitable. This did not, however, prove to be entirely the case.
There's no question that the paradigm that Guns N' Roses got caught up in as time went on was very much a 1990s paradigm of the mainstream versus the margins. But I actually think that if you look at where they started and you look at heavy metal and you look at Los Angeles, you're actually not talking about places where anyone had a problem with being successful. I mean, the notion of that there was something to be embarrassed about where success was concerned, that was really much more of a kind of avant-garde rock notion, a college rock notion.
Guns N' Roses was what a lot of people aspired to. They really broke through and they were leading the crowd.
In LA, we were so happy that somebody was actually taking the torch and continuing the metal glam scene, because if Guns N' Roses hadn't come along when they did, the LA glam scene would have been gone years prior. But Guns N' Roses, in my opinion, and because I was there, they kept the scene alive for, another 3 to 5 years. And otherwise it would have perished before that. It would have been a real drag.
There was a pretty tight network of dudes. And when one of them out of the masses would shoot up to stardom, of course there's going to be resentment, because you were going to Rock and Roll Denny's on Sunset Boulevard with that dude the night before. You were going to Cantor's. You were living probably in the same apartment complex with a guy from Quiet Riot or a guy from Winger. and you were partying with them at the Jet Boy show at the Cat House. They were all in this tight network, in each other's faces day in and day out. Not only on the scene, not only at the recording studios. I mean, in their everyday life, it was the whole city was taken over by these guys with teased hair and leather jackets. So when one of them would crawl out of the the lobster cage, of course the rest of them are going to try to pull that dude back in. And especially when you're an inflammatory person to begin with. You're kind of an abrasive dude like Axl was.
Despite having the world at their feet, it would be a further 3 years before Guns N' Roses unveiled their next project. It would prove to be a turbulent time for the band, non-stop touring accompanied by a number of personal problems, which would eventually result in the dismissal of drummer Steven Adler, to be replaced by former Cult member Matt Sorum.
When GNR first started recording what were to be the Use Your Illusion albums, Steven Adler was still very much the drummer, but they'd had problems with him for a long time. He had a heavy drug dependency. Now, I'm not suggesting for a moment the rest of the band were completely clean, because they were not. In fact, there was a famous incident in Los Angeles when GNR opened for the Rolling Stones in the summer of 1989, when Axl pretty much went on stage and said, "This is it, the band are over," because one or two members of this band can't actually get off their drugs. And he was talking about Izzy and Slash, not Adler.
Steven Adler was becoming a problem, was apparently drugged out and drunk a lot and couldn't play.
When Steve got thrown out of the band, I think when Matt's a great drummer and all, but it just didn't have. Steve had this special beat that wasn't so. I think Matt's a good player, but he's kind of more of a machine, like not as much feel. Steve was not as good of a drummer, but had a much better feel. And once you took out one of the ingredients in the band, I think it never was the same again. I believe the first, the original lineup was Guns N' Roses.
Matt Sorum, who came from the Cult and was a great drummer.
And on the drums, here to turn your brains into mashed rice, is Mr. Matt Sorum.
Musically at the time, I think they were in peak form. Slash, drunk as he was an exceptional guitar player. When you hear Slash play guitar, you know that's Slash, and that's what makes a good guitar player.
Slash was apparently at the height of his heroin addiction. So that, coupled with the fact that they were still touring for Appetite quite a long time after it had been released, meant they were writing on the road a lot. And really, it's quite a surprise that they ever got a very good album out of it, because everything was kind of haphazard in the way it came together.
Right before Use Your Illusion, they just started writing. They were also writing, I think, on the road too. But Axl's always had like lyrics and stuff in his head anyway, so he always jots stuff down.
They made Illusion here. Mike Klink, their producer, was based here, and the band recorded here. The Use Your Illusion sessions were not by any means normal. They didn't have a real strict time constraint. As the band toured so much, they started to put their material together, and they discovered that the Appetite and the Lies EP were just a small amount of the material that they had laying around. So they went back and they looked at all of the songs, and they said, we're going to record them all. We're going to make 2 double albums. And there was a great hubris, musical, creative hubris about GNR at that time. Because when you're on top of the world, then you can do whatever you want to do. So they began the process with their producer of creating this record. And it took quite a long time to put Illusion together.
They were looking for a place to mix Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. That they could be off the radar screen. They also had a number of tracks, so they needed an extremely large frame console. And in those days, a big console was a 72 channel. And I had one of only 2 80s in town. Guns N' Roses in those days were over the top popular. I mean, they couldn't go anywhere. And if they'd be at a studio and anybody knew they were at the studio, there'd be 40 people outside of it. So we were always a low-profile studio, and they just decided to come here so that they could do it in private. Anytime you're working with a band that big, it's going to take some time to mix a record, no matter what the circumstances are.
There was continuous talk that the record was being delayed, and Axl was really upset that anyone would say it was delayed. It couldn't be delayed because it wasn't finished yet, and he was very vocal about the fact that he wasn't in it for anybody but the fans. He wanted to give the fans the best package.
Use Your Illusion was originally mixed by Bob Clearmountain, who had worked with the Stones on down. I mean, he's a legendary mixer. But when Slash and Axl heard the mixes, they thought the record sounded too clean, too slick. And as good as Use Your Illusion sounds sonically, the original mixes were way cleaner. They went after Bill Price, the Sex Pistols mixer.
They tested just about everybody in town and throughout the world to who they wanted to have mix this, and it ended up that Bill Price was giving them the closest thing to what they were looking for. Bill is a brilliant mixer. He did Rock the Casbah and a whole host of records. Brilliant engineer and an extremely cool guy, which you need to have with a group like Guns N' Roses. You know, somebody who doesn't become part of the crazy process and is always bringing it home. My interaction was way more with Bill than it was with the group. Since the process took 6 months, there was times when the group was here and then times when they were out on the road performing. So early on, the group was here and coming in and listening to the mixes and that sort of thing. And then later on in the summer when they were on tour, we would have to FedEx what we considered to be a final mix to wherever they were. Gee, they're going to be in St. Louis tomorrow, so let's FedEx the mix to the Bonaventure in St. Louis or wherever they were staying, and then we'd wait to hear back from them. That certainly added to the time that it took to mix it, because we didn't necessarily get an answer back in 10 minutes. Sometimes it was 2 days.
With mixing on the albums drawing to a close, it soon became official news. There was not only one, but 2 Guns N' Roses double albums on the way. Expectations were being formed. With the long and uneven history of the double album, many were wondering exactly how the band would tackle the format.
If you go back to the history of double albums, the first ever recorded double album was Benny Goodman at Carnegie Hall. It's the first time anybody ever put out a double album. And then in rock and roll was Bob Dylan. You got Blonde on Blonde. And then so many other double albums have come. And usually by a record company standard, that's like, could be a kiss of death.
There was already the rumors after Appetite hit that, they were starting to get a little bit too rock star. They were starting to get self-indulgent. They were going to get over-bloated. They were going to try to go different places musically than they should, and they were losing their street cred. And then, the rumors start to come out. And you got to remember, there's a huge gap of time between Appetite and when the actual Use Your Illusion album comes out. The buzz starts early, but the gap is big. And during that time, there's all this speculation. And then you start to hear double album, and you go, uh-oh.
I think once You Could Be Mine came out, people kind of warmed to the idea of a lot of material, and they're also eager to hear how most bands would do 10 to 12 songs on an album. Suddenly this band's got 30 odd songs and they're willing to release a lot. I think that created excitement rather than trepidation. And once the single was out and people knew how good it was, they were just itching to hear the rest of it.
and You Could Be Mine was a huge hit, radio hit. I mean, that was, people were already, you know, excited by that point.
I thought that's where they've been hiding. They've been writing songs all this time, and they just had so many different tracks to get out that one album wasn't enough.
Before the albums emerged, however, Guns N' Roses would be embarking on their mammoth promotional tour 4 months prior to release date. As well as providing the first chance to hear new material, it also promised the fans a live experience unlike anything they had seen before.
Die-hard fans are already camping out to get front row positions.
Oh, they've got a pretty cool sort of attitude. They don't sort of really care what people think of them, and they say what they think. And
they're not hurting anyone, and it gives a lot of people a lot of outlet for their own aggression and stuff.
Today, the huge stage and lighting structure went up.
It's one of the largest stages ever built in this country. The whole stage structure is over 100 metres across. We've worked hard to make sure that the people are well catered for, well policed, and looked after, basically.
Among those looking after concert goers will be more than 200 police and up to 400 security guards, just to make sure the fans at least stay under control.
Fired up and ready to go, the group hit the road, now joined by pianist Dizzy Reed.
Axl called me up once and he said, okay, we're going on tour and we're going to bring a piano player on tour, so I wanted you to be the piano player, but I promised Dizzy that if we ever go on tour, he's going to be the piano player. So, and I'm like, oh, thanks. So you could have been the huge. So that's when they started doing their own tour and being the headliner, and it just got so big and wonderful.
The growing scale of things would take its toll. Before the year was out, guitarist and songwriter Izzy Stradlin, despite having worked extensively on the new albums, would throw in the towel. He was replaced by Gilby Clarke.
When Izzy left the band, it was a big deal, you know, at least as far as I was concerned. I mean, but, you know, he didn't tour with us anyway. We took a jet, and he had his own tour bus. And so he would tow a trailer with his motorcycles and everything so he could go riding and have fun. He loves to travel. Izzy's a big map guy, too. And so, you know, like wherever we were, he would just meet up with us. We'd fly in, and he would drive in. So, but I started seeing a split then. I don't think Izzy ever wanted the band to get that big. Izzy's the type of guy that he would have been very happy just staying in the clubs.
I think Izzy had enough. Izzy is not a person who enjoys the limelight particularly. He enjoys being anonymous, enjoys getting on with his life. He's very much a nomad, he likes travelling, being a hippie, if you will. And of course, the money from Guns N' Roses gave him a lifestyle that he could do whatever he wanted. But he got fed up with dealing with Axl's tantrums, dealing with the rock star traits which were surrounding the band, and just said, I've had it, I'm out of here. And they brought in Gilby Clarke, who was never, for my mind, really a proper member of the band. I think realistically, with all due respect to Matt Sorum, there are only 5 proper members of Guns N' Roses, and when slowly one by one they left, whoever came in wasn't really coming in as a fully fledged member, but being brought in as a paid member of the band. And I don't think Gilby Clarke brought particularly that much to Guns N' Roses. Competent guitarist, definitely. But what he's done since really sums up the fact, well, how good were you in the first place? You were decent, and you got a lucky break, and good for you, you used it. But the loss of Izzy, not only musically, but also temperamentally, was a major blow, because he was closer to Axl than anybody else. They grew up together in Indiana. And once Izzy was out of the band, I think, in a way, there was nothing left to hold Axl back from becoming the beast that he has.
As the tour was gathering pace, both new albums, entitled Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, were released simultaneously on September 17, 1991. Their arrival would be heralded by a virtually unprecedented wave of hype.
First of all, it's the only band in history that ever put out 2 albums simultaneously, 2 separate albums simultaneously. First time I'd ever seen a record be sold starting at midnight throughout the country. There were lines of people out in front of Tower Records. We watched it on the news. You know, we were part of a record that was on the news upon its release. And these records went gold simultaneously within something like 5 hours of the time that it was released. I mean, who sells 1 million records in 5 hours? Guns N' Roses. That's it. That's the only act that's ever done that, and it's the only time that I know of in musical history that any record was that anticipated.
There wasn't an album like that at that time, you know, at least that I can remember, where people really were lining up to get it. And there was just a certain luster in having it and owning it. This was more than just a musical album. It was something to collect. It was something to have. And just to have it in your hands meant something above and beyond being able to put it in your cassette deck and your record player and play it. You know, it was something to have. It was water cooler talk.
The moment that the Use Your Illusions records came out was a moment where bigness of a variety of kinds had really overtaken pop music as a whole. That record came out at a time when Michael Jackson was putting out records, Garth Brooks was putting out records, U2 was putting out Octung Baby, Metallica were putting out their sort of gigantic record. Blockbuster records were completely accepted as the mainstay of the music industry. They would all come out in the sort of third and fourth quarter of the year, just in time for the Christmas season. The whole fate of the music industry would sort of depend on how well they did. Once they came out, they would stick around for 2 or 3 years with 1 million videos keeping them going.
You're talking about an entirely different universe back in the early 90s, where there was still this Illuminati running the music industry. There were still radio promoters buying off radio station programmers to play records. There was still cocaine and hookers going in and out of radio.
That album is kind of remembered for being perhaps the last kind of big release of the 90s that people can identify with being the primitive format, if you like, of vinyl. And even cassette, it was a double cassette, and it does stand out because there wasn't anything that was like it at the time. There hasn't actually been anything similar since on such a big scale.
Fans were now able to discover the albums in their entirety. 30 tracks of brand new Guns N' Roses material, the first 16 of which featured on part 1 of the double set.
The funny thing about this record is I sort of joke that it's a record where Axl doesn't show up till like partway through, like about halfway through the first disc. It's almost like he's late for his own album. Because you have all these songs that are very much his good friend and songwriting partner Izzy Stradlin's vision that are sort of starting the record. You have Right Next Door to Hell, Dust and Bones. You do have Don't Cry, which is a song that they had been doing ever since the band began.
Don't Cry would have to be one of the standout tracks, and also probably one of their most serious tracks in it. That's possibly because it had been written a lot earlier on, and it took them that long to record it.
Don't Cry was a favorite for so many years, even prior to the release of this. I always loved that song. Being a music nerd and being in LA, I had my demos of GNR demos and unreleased tracks, and that was always a favorite of mine. So to get to hear it in sparkling clarity was totally cool.
I think if you ask most people who are fans of the band, fans of hard rock at that time, you say, as fast as you can, tell me a song of Use Your Illusion. They're going to say November Rain.
It's not till November Rain, which is the 10th song on the first disc, that I think of as sort of Axl doing the songs that were nearest and dearest to him at that moment, the songs that he'd written, the big songs he'd written on his piano, the sort of beauty songs and the songs that were sort of meant to be sort of the statement songs of the record. 10 songs into the first album is where the first one of these things comes in. And that's sort of interesting to me.
It was November Rain that would prove to be the defining moment of both albums, a song memorable as much for its epic scope as its distinctive multi-million-dollar video.
It just showcased the side of Axl that to me was sort of not at all the same sort of Axl that I liked, for want of a better word, on Appetite for Destruction. It was more like a singer-songwriter-esque thing, which was fine. It wasn't necessarily what I think most people embraced Guns N' Roses for initially, but I think it was what they ended up embracing Axl Rose video star for.
The video for November Rain obviously captured the attention, the extravagance of the video, and they did it because they could. Guns N' Roses were in a position to be able to say, how much is that going to cost? Fine, we don't care because we can afford it. And they really put a lot of time and effort into a storyline and into the way they presented the visuals. And it was extravagant, it was flamboyant, it was way over the top. But then the song itself was way over the top, and it needed something like that to present it in the right way. And it's still to this day regarded as an all-time classic video, so it has stood the test of time as a piece of art in its own right.
First time I heard November Rain was a rehearsal stage above the Metro Club in Chicago. And Axl is sitting at the piano. Just him and a piano and a guy at the mixing board. And I'll play you guys something. Oh, this is nice. Feels like Elton John a little bit. Cool. When I look into your eyes, I can see a smile. Whoa, it's nice. And he played a 7.5-minute ballad for us, and then he did the ending, that Layla kind of shift at the end of the song, which is so, to me, defines the brilliance of the song, is where it goes into that shift. And he orchestrated that later, but this is just him at a piano.
Bit more of a childish album in some ways, but then they throw in something like November Rain, which is a very mature song really in the grand scheme of things, and that song is remembered probably the most from that album.
November Rain's gigantic scope was more than matched by the progress of the band's tour, now escalating into something much bigger.
It became a very big group of people. It went from something that was like small and friends to, chiropractors, massage therapists, assistants for assistants, managers' assistants. I mean, it just started growing and growing and growing. And it just got very, very big.
I got to tell you, Slash, who's a friend of mine, was not into keyboards. He was not into the whole keyboard thing. And, Axl had already hired Dizzy. And I was kind of the cleanup guy. I played guitar, sang harmonica, a lot of other stuff, so they needed an extra hand. So he went from having no keyboards to 2. And I don't think he was too happy about it. Nothing was on tape, and that was the one thing that I got to hand it to Axl. He was insistent. We weren't going to have anything taped. It was all going to be played live. So we needed girl singers.
When they started getting background singers, and I'm not going to say who, but I know that a few of the band members were not too happy about that. That was an Axl idea.
When I first walked in, I was amazed that they looked and acted just like in a video, like they were the same. There's nothing different about them. They're exactly the same. And the way that they had the rehearsal studio with the dripping candles, they had their vibe around them at all times. They dressed it, they wore it, they live it. They were just really the way that they are at all times. It wasn't something they just put on for a video and on stage and then they went back to their regular life. They lived what they were. Well, what was interesting, I had never experienced this. I think it's pretty common for a band at that level, but I had never experienced it at the time. The lead singer wasn't there. So Axl didn't come into the last rehearsal. I didn't meet Axl until the day before we left for the tour. He came to the last rehearsal and said what he liked and what he didn't like, and we were supposed to change it by the show. I thought it was strange, and also now I understand it better that they don't come to all the rehearsals, because for a singer to sing over and over and over is a strain on your voice, and it kind of kills the song for you a little bit. And I understand it now. At the time I didn't understand. I thought he was being a diva. But he had the right to be a diva. So he liked us. We were very nervous that day. He was going to come and say, never mind, I changed my mind, you guys. And he hadn't heard us until that day either. So he was pleased.
My first gig, my first show was Madison Square Garden. And I'm standing up there and I'm like, wow, this is big.
I didn't feel intimidated because I had that idea that I was supposed to do big tours and stuff. So I didn't feel intimidated, but I did feel when I got on stage the immenseness of what was going on. I was very humbled by the amount of energy and love and just rawness that they brought out of thousands and thousands of people, you know, in a stadium. It's incredible. Their fans were some of the most loving, wild, wanting to touch the band, just into it fans. I mean, they would go from city to city sometimes. The same people, you know, would come to the different shows, follow us for a while. We had girls hating on us because they were pissed we were there, and they would give us the finger from the front row. We had just amazing things happen. Girls flocking to come in backstage and just wanting any touch of the band. Yeah, men too, just adoring them.
One of the great things about playing in a band like that is flying into a city and you can see your gig, because it's usually the biggest football stadium. You know, oh, there's the gig. You know, it's not like you know, you drive up to it. You can actually see it from the sky.
That's one reason why we had the plane. You know, we could just fly in the place. So we could base in, like, you know, one area and then fly into the, you know, take helicopters or whatever.
That was quite an experience for me anyway. And I think it was for a lot of the new people that were doing it for the first time.
While they still managed to attain it, this bombastic scale was causing problems for Guns N' Roses. A new, more reality-grounded musical movement had emerged, rendering such overblown pyrotechnics unfashionable overnight. Grunge had arrived, spearheaded by a new assortment of rock heroes from Seattle, Nirvana.
Guns N' Roses and Metallica are soaring, and Skid Row and Def Leppard and all those bands are making tons of money and selling platinum records. But this record, Nevermind, it is the reflection of all that has gone haywire with society. And it's GNR and it's Nirvana, and they really represent a mirror image of each other at a time where there's a complete meltdown.
Personally, I don't think grunge did kill off the hair bands. The weaker ones, the ones that were on the periphery, then yes. But the big bands like Guns N' Roses were not suddenly out of favour because of Nirvana or because of that scene. Despite the fact Kurt Cobain and Axl fell out kind of on a large scale publicly.
All of a sudden, Axl, who'd really, you know, I think sort of expected that, like, he'd be friends with Nirvana and that, you know, these groups would sort of just come out with him and they'd all be, you know, rock and roll elite together, realized that he wasn't invited to the party.
A lot of the new bands were then not wanting to be Guns N' Roses, they wanted to be Nirvana. So the new scene was changing, but the old guard, if you like, was still popular. Guns N' Roses could still tour and sell out stadiums, even at the height of grunge. It's just that they didn't. By that time, they were completely fractured and splitting apart, but they could have, and Metallica still retain the status as a kind of traditional metal band, and a lot of other bands did too. It's just that the focus was suddenly on grunge, and because of that, people assumed that that killed the other bands off. But looking at it really, if Guns N' Roses had released something like Use Your Illusion in the mid-90s, then the whole thing could have been different anyway.
Even though November Rain was distinctly out of favour with Nirvana acolytes, Guns N' Roses fans still held it close to their hearts, as well as the rest of Use Your Illusion 1, which, following the song, takes on a far less sentimental edge.
The rest of the first disc is pretty much this kind of crazy kick that Axl was on. So you have November Rain, The Garden, and Garden of Eden, sort of these songs of like lost innocence, basically.
It's a critical solution. East Coast got the blues. It's a massive confusion, like the lies they sell to you. You gotta go out, y'all, do the governmental disease, and they be running around back, team line up on the knees.
There's a lot of rants in the album, sort of Garden of Eden and Back Off Bitch, Don't Damn Me. That was all kind of Axl's revenge, if you like, through words, either at women or the press or whoever he felt like at the time. Garden of Eden was kind of about his oppressed religion that he was trying to get away from his childhood.
The second half of the record is very much kind of like an Axl concept album on a certain level. And I think that's, to me at least, is where Use Your Illusion gets a lot more interesting.
My all-time favorite song on the Use Your Illusion 1 is the final track, the epic Coma. I think that at the time, I'd never heard anything like that.
Coma, which is the longest track on Use Your Illusion 1, I think I'm right in saying it's the longest track that Guns N' Roses have ever recorded, 10 minutes. It's very progressive. It reminds me a lot, in some ways, of King Crimson, in the way that it builds and it moves in different directions. It's very eerie, very atmospheric, and you can actually hear in it at one point doctors talking, and they're actually genuine doctors.
Okay, we're starting to lose this guy. Let's get some people in here. Get the crash cart, please. We're losing this guy. Get that way, please. What's going under? We're losing him. How about an IV stab? Okay, you better protect the airway. We're starting to lose them.
These are the people who actually sort of saved Axl when he overdosed, and he decided to pay them back by saying, do you want to come in the studio and talk on this track? So you have all these doctors talking on the track about Coma, which is about drug problems. I mean, some people say it's aimed at Steven Adler, others that it was aimed at Slash. Whoever it's aimed at, the fact is it's a very deep and dark song. And it's, again, very different if you compare it to, let's say, November Rain. November Rain is a little dark, but this one is much more personally dark, I feel.
He's putting himself into the state of mind of the protagonist of the song. He has such a kinship with Psychosis that that song is very relevant to me. That it comes from a very deep place.
That one stands out at me, and that's definitely one of my all-time favorite songs in hard rock. So, and it's just unique. It's awesome.
The darker slant of Volume 1's later tracks seemed to act as a direct gateway into Use Your Illusion Part 2, a much more subdued and introspective collection than its sibling.
The second album is probably not as like absolutely divided as the first one. It starts off with the song Civil War, and Civil War was a song that had come out a little while before Use Your Illusion.
Civil War was a really good song. I mean, a really good rock and roll song. And you kind of saw them thinking outside the box like you knew they were going to. But it wasn't so crazy and so over the top and avant and self-indulgent. And it had a kind of, if you listen to the lyrics, it had a meaningful, positive political message.
Look at you young men fighting. Look at you women crying. Look at you young men dying. The way they've always done before.
It was a song that kind of like gave you the rock and roll edge that you were expecting from Guns N' Roses, but it also showed that they, like I said, that they had a tad bit of an intellectual mind, you know, and that's what you're looking for with them, because the brutal power behind their music and the danger is fucking unchartable. But yet at the same time, go back and listen. These are not meatheads making music. I mean, there's a very serious amount of thought and thoughtfulness into what goes into their songwriting. And I thought that Civil War caught that perfectly.
Civil War is probably my favourite track on either album, to be fair. Again, it's a very long track, about 7 minutes in length, I do believe. It opens with a speech from the Paul Newman movie Cool Hand Luke, and then has a wonderful melody and also an evocative sense of the futility of war. And the way Axl and the band presented is magnificent.
You could see Axl as almost like liberal rocker who could participate in a benefit concert and sort of sing a song that could be interpreted as having politically progressive sentiments. This was the song. And it's interesting that that version, which was, I think, immensely attractive to certain kinds of rock critics and certain kinds of people who just wished that the whole Guns N' Roses thing could be a little less psychopathically masculine, that Civil War didn't turn out to be a song that was like that immensely popular with Guns N' Roses fans. So it's a sort of road not taken ultimately. I think it's a great song, but it's an example of how Guns N' Roses were not gonna become that sort of band. They weren't gonna make that switch. Then you have a couple of Izzy songs that to me are sort of more examples of how his vision was just a much more sort of straightforward rock as wildness kind of vision. So songs like Pretty Tied Up. And then you get Yesterdays, which I think is one of the prettiest songs, actually, maybe the prettiest song on either of the two records. Just a great showcase for Axl's voice and just like the way he kind of croons the Yesterday's Got Nothing For Me line. Such an odd kind of singing too. It's maybe the kind of singing that can only work in a studio environment where every note can be punched in again if you don't like the way it sounds. And he has such a sort of unique tonality.
Suddenly this time I found I'm on the streets and I'm all alone. Yesterday's got nothing for me. Oh, pictures that I'll always see. I ain't got time to reminisce on novelties.
I think the second album is a lot more together. There's sort of only really You Could Be Mine and I'd say Civil War that stand out as being particularly different on that album, and My World obviously ending it. The rest of it is all kind of sewn together in a kind of emotional Axl tapestry from Yesterdays to Breakdown and Estranged. It's all kind of very introspective.
So nobody ever told you, baby, how it was gonna be. So what'll happen to you, baby? Guess we'll have to wait and see.
Estranged is like the November Rain that no one listened to. And for Axl, I think he intended that song to be like the final great summation of sort of lots of that record.
I personally don't believe that it was necessarily intended to be the sequel to November Rain. I think it's a different type of song that connects because of the lyrics with what was being talked about in Rain. But it's a good song in its own right. It's got a strong sense of purpose and melody. But like a lot of stuff on 2, it's perhaps slightly more commercial than would seem to be the case for the stuff on 1, particularly November Rain.
The November Rain Estranged combination, in many ways, I think Estranged is a more ambitious track. It's got so many parts going and so much happening. But together they're just really You know, it's anthemic. They're like, it's like a heart anthem, those two songs together.
The song that was supposed to be sort of like the capper of these two records doesn't, lands with a thud. And so that's sort of the tragic song in a way on the second record.
Use Your Illusion 2 also explored very self-referential territory. The track Get in the Ring was a vicious lyrical attack by Axl on rock journalists who had criticised Guns N' Roses' conduct while on tour.
Probably the most laughable track, but it's still a good one in its own way, is Get in the Ring, which actually started as a Duff song called Why Do You Look at Me When You Hate Me? And then Axl adapted it to basically have a go at all these media people he felt had slighted either him or the band. I mean, it's Mick Wall at Kerrang, Andy Sesher at Hit Parader, Bob Guccione Jr. at Spin. He name-checked them all and a way of trying to humiliate them. But of course, all he did really was build up their own egos and build up their own sense of belonging and make people ask them all the time, why are you in that Guns N' Roses song? He gave them a certain fame, which wasn't the idea. And I think he also misread and misunderstood the point of the media. It's not there just to kowtow to Axl.
That goes for all you punks in the press that want to start shit by printing lies instead of the things we said. That means you, Andy Sesher at Hit Parader, Circus Magazine, Mick Wall at Kerrang, Bob Guccione Jr. at Spin. What, you pissed off because your dad gets more pussy than you? Fuck you! Suck my fucking dick!
In my fantasy version of Use Your Illusion, Get in the Ring just has to be the final encore when everyone's completely drunk and ready to leave. That's the song where he's just basically like challenging people from magazines he doesn't like to get in the ring and have a little boxing competition or something. But the funny thing about Get in the Ring is for a song that has such a sort of stupid purpose, it's really catchy.
The funniest thing about that song is challenging to get in the ring with him. Bob Guccione Jr. accepted a challenge and never heard back from Axl, which is ridiculous in a way because you would have thought Axl would have carried through that sort of thing.
Many observers, though, even fans of Get in the Ring, would grudgingly have to agree that the critics may have had a point. The Use Your Illusion tour was proving more tumultuous than anyone expected. Audience riots were commonplace, most famously at the St. Louis incident, in which the band lost $1 million worth of equipment. Axl and the band, it seemed, could not help but bring chaos wherever they went.
The St. Louis riot, that was a real bummer, okay? Some guy was like bluntly taking pictures, and he was a biker guy, and he was like really pushing it, with the security guys and just kind of showing everybody, look what I can do, right? And so Axl just had it, and he jumped into the audience after the guy. And the band actually tried to go back out on stage. And, the kids just started pulling up the chairs, they started carrying them down to the front and then throwing them up onto the stage. So to me, they just got into it. It just got way out of hand.
Axl Rose jumped into the audience, caused some repercussions. They are tearing up the stage. We're looking at thousands of dollars worth of damage. As you'll notice. Millions. Photographers, I love it. Entrepreneurs, yes, write a book. Write a book. Fucking A, right.
He looks down in the crowd and he's like, take it from me. All of a sudden he goes, if you won't take it, I'll take it from you. Axl jumps into the crowd. Security gets there in a hurry. Axl's throwing blows.
They tore apart the stage. I think they probably lost like half their gear in that riot. And like the cops too, I remember they were like shooting people with fire hoses on the stage, and then when it got too hectic, they would leave. So, that's one reason why I feel that stage got torn apart, because the cops didn't stay up there.
I know a bunch of the crew guys that were there that were taken to the hospital and cut and stuff like that. Yeah, I have one of the keyboard tech has the front panel to the grand piano in his living room that he had gotten out of the middle of the arena. They had somehow trashed the piano, and so that's kind of funny. But yeah, it's a scary. I mean, it's really scary when it's that many people, and you know, you just don't know. I know there's a couple times where it's like, hurry up, get in the trucks, let's go, we're getting out of here.
We were in Ohio, and we were on stage, backstage, and the whole place was packed, and Axl was still in New York. So Axl was just getting on an airplane to fly from New York to Ohio. They kept saying they might riot, because we're not going to be able to do the whole show, because the police is going to shut us down. It already had gone hours that we were waiting for him to get there, and the place was getting really intense. And the management had a way for people to get away, but they didn't have a way for all of us to get away. So some of us were going to have to figure out how to get out of there, and get on the buses. So that was very unnerving. That was one of the most scary things that happened on the tour.
We went through another one of those in Montreal when we did the double bill with Metallica.
What did they hit you with?
With the baton. Like right by us. They just came running up. We were like hugging that pole. We were like hugging the pole. Like,
were you guys throwing rocks?
No, we were standing behind the pole so we wouldn't get hit.
I got attacked by a cop dog for no reason. I was standing there and they started beating me, telling me to run.
Oh, it's that way! Oh, hey, motherfucker!
He's here on camera here, hey? He's here on camera.
They sent us this way! They sent us this way!
Unfortunately, Axl was he has had problems with his voice for the last couple shows, and it was hard for him to sing anyway. And when that happened, he came out to try to sing, and the monitors weren't quite right, and he just says, "I can't sing, I can't," and that's when all hell broke loose. And he was, and again, that was the night where he came into the dressing room where I was sitting. I just found a room, and I just was sitting there with Slash, and he walked in. He goes, "You know what? We're the biggest band in the world. Why can't I hear myself? Why am I always having problems?" And again, because he was hoarse, and that's like we could hear him tearing up the arena. They were pulling the seats out. And it was pretty crazy.
I think the St. Louis riot was very typical of the tour and the kind of the chaos that surrounded the band generally. Axl was always a focal point because he'd often turn up late. Sometimes he wouldn't turn up at all. And often, even when he did, he'd throw a tantrum on stage. He'd either have a go at Slash or the audience or the security. There'd be something that would piss him off, one in every 3 or 4 dates.
I feel personally that the main reason that Axl Rose was allowed to run riot and out of control to become who he is today was because the other members of the band, I mean, I'm talking about the end of the 80s, beginning of the 90s, when they had the chance still to rein him in, decided to deal with Axl by compromising. He wanted something, they gave it to him. So he wanted more, so they gave it to him. So he wanted yet more, so they gave it to him. And the whole attitude seemed to be, if it keeps Axl happy and keeps him going on stage and keeps him going in the studio, we're happy. Wrong.
There are many other people in this world that react to situations just the same way because not all of us are perfect, but it doesn't get, on national television. So his is hyped up because he is who he is, but he also doesn't try to hide it. Axl is what he is.
I don't think anybody likes to see people get hurt. I don't think anybody wants, fans of theirs to come to a rock and roll show and not enjoy themselves and actually, get hurt and go home and have injuries and that type of shit be associated with your band. But at the same time, I think it is par for the course. If it wasn't going to happen on stage, it was going to happen backstage.
Man, that's a rock star. We don't see rock stars like that anymore. You see guys now that are ashamed to be rock stars almost. You don't see that kind of intensity. So yeah, it sucks that people had to be hurt or there has to be, litigations and all that kind of stuff. But you know what? The danger. That's what made Guns N' Roses so fucking brilliant, was the fact that they did incite a riot. They did. Axl Rose was the epitome of a rock star. I mean, that was like the last time you get to see that.
We did the stuff that like guys like The Who and all those bands did. We had hot tubs with strippers in them. We had theme nights. You know, we're in Indianapolis, and they bring in an indie car with indie girls, and they put the yellow rope around it. So, I mean, we had one. Oh my God, we had one party where it was a Roman toga night, and they had these guys, these bodybuilders dressed up with oiled up and carrying around a roasted pig.
What I understood was they had a thing with women, of course, and women were always around, and they loved, being with women. And so when they decided to bring 5 women on the tour, some of the management was a little bit afraid, and so they made sure that they understood, these lines, to be drawn between the women you work with and the women that you just play with. And Slash actually said, I have a rule that I don't sleep with women that I work with. I was amazed by some of the people. They could party and just keep going. I couldn't figure out that part out, but they had it in them. Just party, do another show, party, especially the crew having to put up a huge show and tear it down and go to another city, put it up the next morning, and still partying.
It's a rock and roll spirit. It's a rebel spirit. It's all it's supposed to be about. And we're definitely lacking that in 2007. And if it happens now, it's put on. It's like someone studies that, and it's not natural. Guns N' Roses was the last bastion of, the Mick Jaggers, the Keith Richards. Like, that was the last dangerous rock and roll band, in my opinion.
Chaos and partying aside, the tour had one other major linking factor with the album. Each volume of Use Your Illusion featured a cover version, which would nearly always be performed live. Axl and the band taking on Paul McCartney's Live and Let Die and Bob Dylan's Knockin' on Heaven's Door. Such unconventional choices would help to highlight the band's less obvious musical influences.
Knockin' on Heaven's Door, I love the way they covered that song because they do it in the right way. If you're going to do a cover, make it your own, but also show respect to the original artist. And they did that with Knockin' on Heaven's Door.
It's almost as if, these guys who you used to think spent all their time in hell are now knocking on another door. And their presentation was, it had a religious quality to it.
The band itself was kind of on the verge of their own destruction, and everyone around them at that time was on the verge of their own destruction biologically. I mean, people were dropping dead. Slash was on the verge of dropping dead many a times. This band was on the verge of becoming extinct. So I think that, Knockin' on Heaven's Door was probably a pretty worthy and a pretty appropriate song for them to be playing.
Knocking on Heaven's Door is a Dylan song, but it's kind of a funny Dylan song in that it wasn't necessarily a giant anthem at the moment when Dylan puts it out. It actually comes out on a Sam Peckinpah film, and it's kind of like a casually thrown off song that people just kind of gradually realize, oh no, that's a big rock anthem here.
I feel I'm knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door. Knock, knock, knocking on heaven's door.
You can't really compare the Bob Dylan version to the Guns N' Roses one. They're both brilliant in their own way, but they did something a lot of bands couldn't do and made that song their own. And I think a lot of people believed that it was a Guns N' Roses track and didn't realise, probably still don't realise it was by Bob Dylan.
They're both good choices in the sense that they're like big songs that maybe hadn't been completely drained of their significance by other people or by the course of history. So and they work in concert, and they do one of the things that I think the Guns N' Roses audience wants, which is for the band to kind of connect back to the history of classic rock.
I love the cover they did of the Paul McCartney tune, Live and Let Die. That, you talk about left field. It almost feels like there should be more to the song, but there isn't. But it's exactly the way it was supposed to be. And in concert, it packed such a wallop. It was a real favorite on that tour.
Say living up, yeah. Living up, yeah.
Well, it's funny that they cover Live and Let Die because that was a song that was in Paul McCartney's career, a representation of him losing all his kind of street cred as an artist and doing these over-bloated commercial songs. And then Guns N' Roses decides to go and cover that for their album, which many people will look back and see as their entranceway into, you know, middle-of-the-road commercial rock and roll. And I thought it was funny.
If this ever-changing world in which we live in makes you give in and cry, so live and let die.
I think they were quite unusual in their choice of cover songs because a Bob Dylan song and a Wings track was not the kind of song that a sort of hard or glam rock band would normally choose. It would tend to be something like T-Rex. And it was kind of showed that they had a lot more to them and there was a lot more depth in their message, if there was one, that the things that they liked were more kind of emotional and even introspective in some ways.
Axl obviously has good taste. He's very interested and influenced by Elton John and Paul McCartney, and all these guys have been at the top of their game for decades.
L.A. laid down, seamstress for the band, pretty-eyed, pirate smile, you marry a music man.
I think Axl was on that path as well. When he was starting out and, you know, when things were going really good for about a decade there.
Axl used to come over all the time because I had a piano at the house, upright piano, and he used to play the song, and he's always, one day this is going to be the biggest song. And we always used to play Elton John songs together, you know, because, you know, when you're a piano player, that's what you play. And, you know, it was real Elton John-y, and he used to tell me how much he loved Elton John, you know. It was kind of funny. Axl loves Elton John. But then I really cracked up when I saw that Music Awards or something where Elton John actually came out and was playing November Rain with him.
Elton was going to play November Rain with us, and he was very nervous about it because he was a huge fan of Elton's. And I remember very distinctly that when the two pianos came up, I think they both lifted up. Elton just kept looking at Axl just to make sure, because, you know, Elton's a very good piano player. And, you know, Axl was doing his thing. He was just kind of keeping an eye out that nothing was going to go wrong. But I remember Axl being very, very in awe of Elton. Same thing when he did the Freddie Mercury show, the tribute show. He was going to sing. What was he going to sing? He was going to sing one of Freddie's songs, and didn't rehearse. And we were all like, "Oh man, whoa, man!" You know, everybody rehearsed except Axl, and he just was back in his room, just working on the song, and man, he nailed it. I was watching it from backstage, and when he was done, I was like, yes, that's great. That's greatness, you know. Dean Martin never rehearsed. He would watch the rehearsal backstage, and then he would just go out and do it. Some people can do that.
Eventually, the whirlwind of attention around the new releases began to subside. Yet, the infamous accompanying tour would carry on until July 1993, an ordeal which contributed in no small way to the further disintegration of the band and their slide into irrelevance with the follow-up covers album, The Spaghetti Incident.
There's no sense anymore of what the group is about. They put out a covers album of mostly punk songs, and it's seen by some people as like a desperate attempt to keep up with like the alternative rock crowd, even though that's really not fair, and they've been, you know, doing those songs for a zillion years.
By that time, I don't think they even had a chance. There's nothing they could have done by that time. The climate had changed, and it was Soundgarden, and it was Alice in Chains, and it was Nirvana, and there's really nothing. Guns N' Roses by that time were yesterday's news.
You can't manufacture what they were getting on the records earlier on. Once it got to the time that they were making The Spaghetti Incident, it had gone too far, where if you can't even get the guys in the same room together consistently, you can't make a quality record.
I would say that as far as Spaghetti Incident goes, the Swan Song was done. It was, that to me, in my mind, that record came out after it was over. It was, the energy reached its peak during Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, and then after that, it was just kind of picking up pieces at that point, you know.
The Spaghetti Incident, in a way, was a waste of time, but in another way, it was just getting a record out to fulfill a contractual obligation. It's a covers record, and some of the covers are decent, other covers on it are not very good at all. And of course, the big controversy was they did a Charles Manson song, and everyone was up in arms about it. But the problem is, where do you draw the line between an artist and what he does in his personal life? And I don't think in any way, shape or form Guns N' Roses was necessarily saying, we love Charles Manson and what he did. In fact, they never said that, but they said, we think it's a cool song, we want to do it. But Spaghetti Incident really was just an interim album. It's neither fish nor fowl, neither here nor there. But then a lot of bands have done covers albums since. It's a way of treading water, having something new out there, but it's not taking up all your original songs. And it may well be at the time, Gino weren't ready to write any original songs, and they had to put this out so they could keep a momentum going.
The whole music scene was about to change. They released it at the wrong time without even realising it, and they've struggled ever since because they know that they have to do something spectacular to bring the band back to where they were before that album came out.
What with Axl powering on with a new incarnation of Guns N' Roses, many fans are now asking the same question. Will long-delayed new album Chinese Democracy, now over a decade in the making, ever be able to match the unique high point of the Use Your Illusion saga?
It makes for good myth, doesn't it? It's kind of become the legend of the unreleased album. Maybe they're better off waiting a little bit until the climate's better. Right now we're seeing a lot of changes in the way Americans listen to music now, so it certainly wouldn't hurt to have a great record come out. I'd be for it.
They should do what Motley Crue did, get their original band members back, get Izzy back in the band, and just say, let's make a record. And make a record without thinking about how the marketing of it or the sales of it, or trying to make a big statement, because the statement is them.
If Chinese Democracy came out tomorrow, there'd be like two things that would need to happen. One is it would have to be kind of good. Not great, just kind of good, not kind of laughable, which means that it would just have to be kind of consistent. And then if something weird happened, if like, for example, if a song became a hit, if it got associated with something, if it just kind of accidentally entered our culture, almost divorced from Guns N' Roses and what they mean, just it became something, then that would be a kind of a way for that band and that music to enter the music business again. But it's too bad that people even knew the name of the record. If I were Axl, whatever record I put out, I would never in a million years call it Chinese Democracy. And if that was the title track, I'd call it Japanese Theocracy and be done with it or something like that. Just anything to just kind of like, that's an albatross that he's had for too long. I'm surprised that he wants to have his product that he's working on be the butt of a joke for such a long period of time.
But isn't it interesting how you bring it up after it's been over a decade since they promised it, because people are still interested in seeing if it's going to come out. Now, if it was pretty much any other band, you know, and an album was planned 10 years ago, everybody would have forgotten about it. But isn't it interesting how people are still asking if Chinese Democracy is still ever going to see the light of day? That tells you something right there.
Whatever has happened, no one can take away the fact that Guns N' Roses achieved what few other bands ever have, creating a worldwide musical event, bringing their own brand of rock and roll to the masses, and defining a genre for generations to come.
They had it all. They had songwriting, they had playing, they had charisma. They were stars. You know, they were the true sense of what a star really is.
You see kids today, infants wearing Guns N' Roses shirts. They really changed culture. I think they're never going to go away. I think the way that they've impacted music and the way they've impacted bands and musicians and songwriting, I think their legacy is, I think it's safe.